only manages people.
Yes.
And it's a functional manager. So it was almost like watching an England football manager negotiating with a club manager. The people managers, all they focus about is your career. And the technical guy wants you to earn money for the organization. So there's always have to broker with the technical guy. But they have an agreement that, you will do 8 days of training in a year or whatever it is. And that agreement is there. They block it out. And so it wasn't like a debate. It was like, this is what you're going to do, and it's planned out. And it was actually quite fantastic.
For this year, our CEO has announced that each and every IBMer needs to invest 40 hours in training. So it's part of your PVC, your performance targets.
And your people manager really supports that, and then you identify with your people manager, with inputs from your functional manager, which could be some of the key areas that you want to develop from both the technical aspect as well as from a soft skill perspective. So that match really works well.
I think part of the problem is, as a senior manager setting the tone, and this stuff, I guess, comes from the very top of the organisation. You have to be quite altruistic, because chances are, if you're a CEO, maybe you've got 5 years, very little value will come out of trying to change an organisation to operate in that way during the period that you're in power, if you like. So you're doing work for your successor and your successor's successor. So it comes back to doing the right thing rather than being self-centered about trying to get the most value out. And I think people can probably see the sort of asset stripper type of senior leader versus the investing in the future type of senior leader. The problem is there's not a great deal. I mean, it becomes part of the culture of the organisation, so it would be very hard to strip that out of an IBM now, I would imagine.
It's becoming
and so, it's less important. But how you actually introduce it, I think you need somebody to have a view that goes well beyond their likely tenure in the organisation. I think it's about whether you buy that the culture of your organisation is important or not, because I think a lot of this stuff grows out of the culture.
And a lot of that is now appealing to the whole millennial thing. That's a massive big thing, and I think culturally we need to start making the change within our firm. It's just interesting you said about the taking away all the social networking. Are people just not on their iPhones anyway? Is it?
Yeah, exactly. I know, it's kind of ridiculous. There is some logic behind it, but we have to. But rather than blocking, we have to find a way of dealing with. Because what it's taking away huge amounts of opportunity for us to network, and then you end up getting these really awful corporate versions of which are horrible to use, and you can't work out how they work. They're not intuitive like a Facebook or whatever it would be. But I think we're going to have to find ways of bringing that stuff in. Most of the issue is around confidentiality and security.
We did
It's such a ridiculous thing anyway, because this world that we live in now is no longer confidential.
It's not confidential.
Whether you follow social media or not,
it's quite interesting. Even in the Singapore office,
Express.
When I get the guys together, I say, how do you communicate? And they all have a WhatsApp group.
Yes.
So on that floor, there's a WhatsApp group. Anything that goes on that floor gets through WhatsApp. Yes. And that's how they communicate, not internally. And I'm thinking, this is what the guys are doing. So actually, so I said, how do you maintain confidentiality? Well, we don't mention our ears in there. We just talk.
Yeah.
We just communicate. So you're already doing it, but as an organization, we're behind it because these guys are communicating externally anyway.
Yeah, we did it. So we did a recent Hudson report on the CEO on the mobile devices and bringing them to organisations, because you've got young people coming in and their technology is more high tech than the organisation they're joining.
Absolutely.
Right. So
and their knowledge of it as well.
So CIOs are really struggling with that balance between how do they manage their confidentiality, how do they keep them engaged, because they walk in. You talked about Microsoft 2003, and at home they've got the latest stuff. They've got an Apple computer and they're doing all sorts of things. So
my nephew goes to telly and does that.
See, I love that. So it's a real challenge, and when you meet with some of these CIOs, and we spent a lot of time last year meeting with them and talking through, they're investing all their money on that security. How do they actually manage that? But you're right, it's really a balancing act. How do they manage? So it's more a case of how do you manage? Are they using RBS or is it just communicating? So it's a real challenge, and I know we've talked to a number of those organisations even in this room about that. So, but the CIOs, they're just going to come up to speed with it. It's interesting. More organisations are adapting to it more and more. Because the more they fight it, the more they lose their people, and that's the reality. Because they are going to lose it. Because I
just joined their networks.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Like when Malaysia votes or something, all the Malaysia office were on WhatsApp, so I just joined their network, and then they just communicate, and you be part of it.
It's our IT guy here, because we have an IT person here, and on day one, anyone new person brings their latest and goes, "Can I have my emails on it?" So because I want to be up to date, keep what's going on in the world as well. You talk about your young generation. I talk about my 12-year-old is telling me in the car how good it is to work at Google. I think when I mentioned you, I'm going. So they're already marketing to that next generation. He's already telling me, you can actually take your dogs to work and they've got a pet, and they're listing it all, and that's a 12-year-old's view of what a workplace should be. So God help us when they do graduate.
It's interesting that sorry.
At IBM, we also have kids at day work, so you can actually bring your kids in and they get to see what is mommy's day like or daddy's day like, and why is it that when you're calling, like, I'm in a meeting, put the phone down, not right now. They understand, you bring them into the environment, they can sit with you at your desk and they can continue to play, just for them to know what it is like. So that helps them also kind of understand, and it's interesting for them.
So a number of you have worked in different countries and different locations or got regional roles. So we bring it back to the Singapore market. So how do we develop the local talent for these senior roles? Because that seems to be one of the biggest issues as well, because we can't just keep bringing in home workers. We just can't, because there's lots of reasons for that. But how do we grab this bunch of people we're talking about and how do we identify if they're local and then bring them through? When I say local, I'm talking about Singapore citizens. So how do we bring them through into these roles? Because they are dropping out for a number of reasons. I think you touched on it, living at home or whatever reason, because we'll get to the same situation in a few years' time when we've got the same issue and nothing's moved along. So really keen to, how do we move them along? How do we...
It's interesting, just to the... Well, one challenge, because we're talking a lot about this, the local talent. We've gone through a whole process of defining, first of all, what local actually is. Because should somebody who has been a permanent resident in Singapore for 15 years be considered as local, even though originally they are from Australia or the UK or the US? And then also is local, even if Singapore is local about considered as Asian, or either Asian or Western, local versus expat, or is it very difficult? So to get to how do we develop local talent, the first thing we're trying to do is, okay, what is local? And we've come up with, so far I think, about 10 different definitions of what local.
We get a different one every day.
Don't
define
it. We've defined different things, but we just say, look, we can spend 2 weeks, 1 year defining it. Let's draw a line somewhere and say, actually, this is what we let's start, because at the end of the day, we want to have a bigger catchment anyway, but we just have to prioritize. So I just threw the guys and said, you come back and you tell me. I didn't tell. I just said, you come back and tell me what you believe is a local definition. And they said, we don't believe it's a local definition. Let's start with, all they came out, let's start with people who are Singapore citizens. Let's start with that. Whatever the definition is, let's work through that. And then
if you work with,
that's what they've come up with.
IBM, we work with EDB. There are some initiatives, and we work with EDB, and we get some funding from EDB to hire, we're working on this program to hire 20 people, and we train them on certain skills. So for them, the definition, so they say you have to hire everybody to be local, and the definition of local is Singaporean and Singapore citizen PR.
Yeah, that's what we kind of define and say, let's go with that. But it's interesting, when you do statistics, in our organization around Singapore citizens, there's not that many. If you add on PRs, it adds a bit more, and the rest, but actually citizens itself, because even a lot of the Malaysians living here are on PR, not citizens.
That's right.
So that's why the interesting thing is, right? Because I am a local.
Exactly,
right?
local. They call it local. That's exactly what I said. Local. It's a new definition.
Exactly. But it's not. So first of all, I guess you have to think about it from the government's effort.
Yes.
Right. You can't think of it from the company's effort. Think about what the government is saying. Think about the white paper. Think about how many people we have, in several years later, and 55% of them are pure Singaporeans, are called Singaporeans. So first of all, a lot of people like to also ask me, how do we attract more Singaporeans into the organization? Now, there is a limitation to it because now, last time maybe when I sit in a meeting with people, I see a lot of Singaporeans. Now I'm become a minority myself, right? You can just look around. In every meetings I go, it's a minority, and we could go into diversity some more, right? Because it's about women and locals and all. So I think that's a proposition that first of all, if you understand what the government is doing, then we need to get away from it. Finding a Singaporean to really groom them, yeah, that's the best thing. But at the end of the day, even for us, really the best person gets the job. That's what it is, right? We need people to move around in that space. So I think if we're trying very hard, we should continue unless you can say that there's a job, and then you find somebody with different experience, and then you pick the Singaporean. A lot of times you don't have that choice. Not even for ourselves, we don't have that choice where we needed somebody who is actually exposed and different. We wish that we could, but at the end of the day, so sometimes a lot of managers come to ask me, should I pick this person or not? No, you pick the best person. That's really what it is, right? That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, no, I do agree you pick the best person, but there are some practical things being in. I mean, I can relate to it because I grew up in Ghana, studying in the UK, and working in the UK. There are some practical things that one always has to look at. The education system is very, very different, and which means that you've got to think long term, not short term. Which means organizations actually have to start investing with the universities as well, because the way that the talent are coming through, sometimes when they come through the organization, there is a perception that they've studied significantly, but not necessarily having a broader aspiration. So you can't just fix it overnight. You have to work with some of the universities to expand some of the horizon as well. And I can say the same thing for myself as well, having gone into a different environment. And so then you have to work out that still the best person has to get a job. But who defines what's the best person? It's just a human being defining what they believe is the best person. In the end, a lot of this is subjective, to be fair. So you have to then be pragmatic to say, in the Singapore environment, you have to spend some time, especially around the locals, to nurture, because the person coming from, say, the UK, for example, has had a different experience. So in the end, it'll probably be the best person, not because of that, but not necessarily the best person, but has a different experience. So you have to recognize that and say, okay, how do you nurture the locals to have a different experience as well? And hopefully you can bring those things through. And this is where we spend a lot of our time trying to work out that in the end we'll get the best person, but actually we have to provide a bit of special attention to a number of different segments to be able to nurture them through that. And that's a lot of time we spend our time. Some people may feel it's being special to people. It's not. It's just recognizing that there are different backgrounds and different skill sets, and you have to identify those and then nurture those.
Well, we have some really interesting recruitment conversations, and I had one just the other week with someone who wanted to recruit somebody because they were a yes person, and they would basically do whatever this person said. They weren't going to be a challenge, and having a conversation. My expectations of somebody that I'm bringing into the business completely different to what the Singaporean manager wanted from their individual. And you have these conversations about, what makes the person good, whether it's technically or, with our graduate recruitment. They're looking at the grades. Oh my God, they've got all A's. They can't hold a conversation. How are they going to speak to a client? How are they going to network? Let's get the person that's got maybe the odd B. Dare they do get a B, instead of an A all the time. And it's like having these conversations with some of the managers is quite frustrating.
And it's basic things in basic education as well, because invariably, to your point, a lot of some of the managers will all be experts, and they will say to you they're very qualified in managing a local talent. In some cases, they're not. So even if you sit in a room of 10 people, you see a number of people being quiet. I mean, how do you get them into the conversation? Because invariably, the person sometimes who's the loudest, you think, actually is. But the one with the real knowledge, and I find that especially in Singapore, if you don't get to some sort of informal conversations and you really bring the best out, you will leave some of these guys behind. So it's about educating managers as well to spot the differences and all that, and that's where it needs a bit of work around that, because you can't leave it by default that it will happen. Because
why is there a desire for more local? Where does that come from? I don't know what the government paper says, Jen.
So basically, the white paper says that we need to grow the population for economic purposes and all the wonderful things. And at the end of the day, it's also not to make the locals feel left out.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the main purpose of everything else.
And
I was going to say,
it's
actually, what the problem is for Singapore is it needs more immigration, not that it needs more local.
there's a shrinking and ageing population of citizens,
Yeah.
and that's the number one thing that the government's highlighted. So they're looking for a real balance.
And they also want a more prosperous local
Yeah.
population, which is
Sure.
not an unreasonable aspiration.
Yeah.
And so they're starting to cut back the number of immigrants actually that can enter the workforce, and encouraging businesses to educate and lift the local population.
It's balance, isn't it?
It is a balance.
Because we get to the point where the tax rate has to hike up in order to be able to afford an elderly population for the people versus getting more people into the workforce, so you keep expanding the workforce.
And some of the policies brought in. So with graduates now, you can't hire foreign graduates. So it's really about focusing on that local talent and start to bring those through. And it makes perfect sense, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big challenges, and we're sort of touching on it, is how you manage those cultural differences in global organisations.
That's more
Because I think one of the things that I've seen in two organisations with Singaporean managers, Hong Kong, I mean everywhere really, is how they interact with wherever their head office is. Whether that's Switzerland or the UK or the US, and that to be a senior manager of whatever background, you have to be able to adapt your culture to the head office, to be able to communicate, and once you get to a certain level of seniority. It's very different if you're running a local business. If you're running a local, not a large portion of our client base for RBS is Singaporean local. There is some, and there's some important ones, and so there's a clear cultural connection between Singaporeans and Singaporean investors. But when your pool of clients is much broader, you need to have the ability to connect UK or US investors into the Singaporean market as well, or into the Asian market.
I'm quite interested in Nerida, in ANZ Bank, how Nerida's head of internal recruitment here. So I'm quite interested to know how you are addressing this particular issue from an internal recruitment perspective.
It's a really interesting one. It's a huge issue for us at the moment as well. And we had this conversation, HR and recruitment, the other day. And it was around, because we're growing, we're lucky, we're in a fortunate position where we're actually, creating a lot of roles in Singapore. But the first thing we do is go externally, we go internationally, and we find people with the skills and the experience that we have because we don't think we've got it internally. And the challenge is, at what point do we stop and say, let's look internally and give some of these people a chance, even though they don't have 100% what we're looking for?
That is important.
And that is it's really hard because we're growing. We need people to deliver here, but how can we get them from here up to here and support that as well? So we don't have the answers at all, but it's something we're focusing on.
I was going to say, we've got the same problem, and I think it's your organisational drivers, the pressure on your senior leaders who normally are your expats. I've got a position that otherwise would be great for grooming a local, but I need someone in there who I know can do the job, and I'm driven by the short-term priorities of the business. So therefore, that's what I'm looking to, or how I look to fill the role, as opposed to using it as a development opportunity.
There's one guy, I won't mention names, but I was determined that I think he was ready to become an MD. It's a local. And I sat down with him and I said, I think you could be an MD, but this is the streetwise of how the organization works. So I always tell the people that some of the things which are written in the book, and there are things which are streetwise in any organization. And you have to invest time understanding the streetwise of the organization, which is how the promotion system works, how these things work. And if you don't understand that, how are you going to do that? So I spoke to the local and I said, this is what you have to do. And he says, well, that's not how I'm brought up. So then how do you manage someone to be able to spend time understanding the global teams, networking with the global teams? That person he says to me that actually most decisions in banks, in foreign banks, get done after 1 a.m. after drinks. And for locals, we want to go home by 10 o'clock. So how do I get into those kind of conversations when I want to go home by 10 o'clock? But actually the rest of expats will be in the pub till 1 o'clock, and that's when the decisions get made. So we have to start from that basic and misalignment in terms of what I think is the practical things of how to do it versus that, and then we have to come to some happy medium of understand the person's background and the person's culture to linking it back to the organization and then get to a situation where that person can be promoted. And in the end, the person gets an MD. But, without understanding the differences that how people are thinking, especially in this place, there's a misalignment, and we have to work through that.
It's not all that different, though, I have to say, from, and I'm old enough to be able to remember this, is with women coming up through management. There was a time when women were just so completely different in the management and executive environment from men that you could not belong to the men's club. You didn't want to belong to the men's club. The particular club that they were running was not one you were interested in, and they had to find a way to integrate us, and we had to find a way to work with them. And over time now, that's become less and less of an issue. But what it requires is some will from both sides, I think. The commitment to making it happen, and people who have the vision to want to create legacies and so on. It does need that.
And it starts with the selection process. So often when we have this, as you were saying, we have the initial interviews that are done by the managers here in Singapore, and then for certain roles we get the regional managers involved, who are often based in London or the US, in the interview process. And you so often hear feedback like, really good communication skills, really thought about their questions, but there's just something that just didn't sort of exude enthusiasm about the role. They weren't, there's that kind of like, I just wanted them to be jumping out their seats with excitement about this fantastic opportunity at Bloomberg. And I'm just going, but that's all very well when you're constantly interviewing people in the US or in the UK, because people come in and they kind of overdo this whole I can't wait to get to work. But culturally there are real differences, and people just aren't. Some cultures just naturally don't come in being really over the top with their enthusiasm, and they almost they look too superficially at just a person and the impression they give, rather than really listening to what they're saying and the skills that they can potentially offer. I think that's something which we work on, is how do we educate people to get better at recognising what you're genuinely looking for. You're not looking for someone who, one manager actually said to me, I just didn't see myself being able to go down to the pub and have a pint with this person. I put down the phone, I was like, I'm coming over. Let's talk about this face to face. If not, this phone's being recorded.
I think do invest. Sorry.
So that's the key point, is to find that balance person.
Right.
It's tough, right? In any culture, in any country, you look for IQ, EQ, right? And just to let you know, Singaporeans do not want to be just selected for the sake of being selected.
That's right.
We are taught in a certain way that deliverables are more important, and therefore you need to use them in the right way, right? So that's one. The second one is, if you have a IQ and EQ person, all the best. You can always train them up. They will always, flexibility, changing environment. And we're brought up in an environment where we want to live in harmony, right? That's what we are. We want to accept different cultures, and all. People who have lived through some things, not that I have, would actually know that, okay, the government tells you, and for all the good reasons, is harmony, acceptance of other people's culture. That is fundamental for us if you look through the Singapore history. So that's where we are always very accepting to foreigners coming to that part of our world. So I think the other thing is, if you deliberately just want to get a local person, you really just need to use them well. No different from sometimes when I talk to, even for myself, I talk to my colleagues in Japan, where English is not their first language. They are slower in terms of understanding, but that doesn't mean that they're not good. You have to use them in their strengths.
Yes.
You have to use them in Japan, because that's where they're very, very good at relationships, Korea and all. So I think it's really using people. So I think it's just the balanced person that you're always looking for.
And it goes right back to what Tracy's saying, when we come into those senior roles, you didn't want to get the job just because you're a woman. You want to get it because you're the right person for the role. And it's the same thing for everyone. It's just making sure that we're actually assessing that. But I'm really conscious of time, and I'm quite enjoying this conversation. So it's 20 past. So what I want to do now is, first off, is thank you all, because I wanted to get you out of here by 10:30. Within your packs, in there is our latest Hudson report, which we did for Q2, and we actually touched on the high potential, some really good findings in there. So if there's any additional information you'd like to know, I didn't introduce Jamie and Craig from our business who are sitting here, so I apologise for that. Jamie from our HR practice and Craig, our director for the HR team. And Tracy's here for the next few days, but we'll make sure you get her contact details if there's any other questions you want to find out about her learnings around the globe, what's happening, because these challenges are not just unique to Singapore. We know the Australians are having the same issues with their visas. We've got an election coming up at the end of the year, so there's a real balancing act on that as well. A lot of the initiatives in that market is about how do we actually hire locally as well. So this is not unique. The US is going through the same. We know the UK is going through the same. So it's good to share this knowledge and continue to learn from it. So I want to thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. It's always tough first thing in the morning. And thank you all. You're also being so open and candid as well. And thank you, Tracy, for coming as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you guys are all right about the local.
It's all right. So you're earlier than I thought you were going to be.
Yeah, they came in early.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so that's I managed to.
Yeah. I'll introduce you to Tracy before you go. Hey, thank you so much for coming.
No worries.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay.